got to say about some of these images here, actually, because I think a couple of the captions you've got there are really powerful.
Oh, so thank you.
About that, yeah. So
well, the know yourself, find your playground is like the mantra of the business. I hate to use the word tagline because it sounds too marketing, but so mantra is probably a more correct term. And it was a couple of years ago, and I was trying to come up with it. I was like, well, what do I really help people do? What do I want to do myself? What's the mission behind what I do, and what's the lifestyle I've created as a result of this? And it basically encapsulates that in those 5 words. It's like I want to help people understand more about who they truly are. Yeah. Because once you've got the foundational knowledge of what inspires you, your gifts, what lifestyle you want to lead, who you really are, your fears, your limiting beliefs, your blueprints, all of that kind of stuff, then you can build, that's the foundation, then you can build a life and a business on top of that. And if you don't do that foundational work in the first place, I believe it's like building a house on marshland or on sand. It's like, yes, you can get some initial growth and it looks cool, but then it's after a while when there's stormy weather or subsidence, it's going to start crumbling. So that's the know yourself is the foundational piece. Wow. And then after that, with that, it's a case of, right, well, what are we going to do with that knowledge? Let's go and find your playground. So whether that's a specific type of business, whether that's a playground, but reframing your existing business so you can get more joy out of it, or a lifestyle that you want to integrate in and around your business, or whatever it is that excites you, that gets your juices flowing, that gets that wild side back in you, that sort of the child in you that you've forgotten about because we've gotten boring and old and we think real life takes over. So there's quite a lot kind of in that tagline, but for me it speaks everything about what I do and the kind of impact that I want to make.
Yeah, nice. And this phrase you use about what type of genius are you? I mean, that's really powerful. It's a very, very powerful question in reality, isn't it? And how do you tend to tap into people's genius side or spirituality?
So yeah, that's a question that when I was on a lot of what I do is inspired by the journey that I went on, like a lot of business owners. And I was in Perth and I was living a very misaligned life. I was running an engineering business, and it wasn't aligned with me at all. And I went to this business accelerator sort of mastermind thing in Perth, Australia, when I was living, and I got introduced to this profile test. Entrepreneurs Institute is the company, and Talent Dynamics is the test. Yeah. And Roger Hamilton's the founder. I think you're familiar with him, and I was just in awe of. I thought I heard that. Brilliant. I'll just keep talking because no one wants to see that thrown out. And sorry about that. It's all right. And his mantra, one of his mantras, is you've got to find your flow. You've got to find your genius. We all have a genius. And I think the phrase he used, he says it's from Albert Einstein, but Albert Einstein's been misquoted more than anyone else in history, I think. So Albert Einstein supposedly said something like, we're all a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend its life thinking it's an idiot. And it's the idea that, and I've probably butchered that quote, but the idea is that we've all got something in us, but often we don't know what it is, or if we do know what it is, we ignore it. We don't allow ourselves to tap into it because of fear or ignorance or lack of awareness or whatever. So what type of genius are you? That's in homage to his process, and I use a profiling tool, the Talent Dynamics test, that he created. That's the first step I get all my clients to do, and it's an amazing way of uncovering. This is just one level of it, but that test is an amazing way of uncovering what it is about you that makes you special, makes you different from everybody else, and how can you tap into that rather than trying to be somebody else and live somebody else's life according to somebody else's blueprint. Just find your own, and then design your life and business around that. Yeah,
that's really nice. I like that. Jim, what would be really nice, we're about to move on to the next part, really, which obviously is the meat of today. And just a quick reminder, everyone, for those of you who haven't introduced yourselves, if you could very kindly just put your name in, well, we know your name actually, but if you could very just kindly indicate what you're really passionate about, especially if it ties in with your personal life and business. And also, if you've got any questions for Jim, don't wait till the very end. Just ask those as you think of them, and we'll obviously try and get to different points and try and answer those for you. But Jim, it's really interesting, your background, again, just getting a little bit more of an introduction into yourself. I know you went to university, didn't you? But you decided to go down a very different path to many other people. Can you just share a little bit about your background and what gave you that big desire and urge to do that as a point of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very long story, and I have a tendency to ramble. So just wave at me or tell me to shut up if I'm going too long.
We've got the Graham Norton handle here, so we can always just...
There you go. So I'll just end up falling back, right? So I went to university. I studied politics because that was what I did at A-level. I found the most interesting, and I went to university, and like lots of people, I had studies like fourth on my list of priorities. I loved university. It was great as a way of introducing me to adult life, standing on my own 2 feet, all that kind of stuff. But come the end of it, a lot of my peers were getting jobs and they were going on graduate programs, and I was looking around going, this looks rubbish. I've got no idea what I want here. So thankfully I've got a very supportive family, and they said, well, why don't you take a year off, do that cliche traveling jobby. So I ended up doing a ski season. I ended up doing 5 years in Whistler in Western Canada. And because I did a year and I was like, I don't want to come back. This is me right now. I was absolutely loving it. I got sponsored working for a plumbing company, so I stayed out there for a few years, and it was all about adventure. It was all about fun. It was all about partying. I did some amazing things, and adult life didn't really cross my mind. And then fast forward, that's 5 years. Then I was like, right, okay, my wallet was really suffering. My liver was suffering. I'd broken my wrists. I'd got concussion. I'd broken my back from skiing and mountain biking and all this stuff. So I was like, well, maybe it's time to grow up a little bit. So then I moved to Western Australia to work in the mining industry, and I wanted to be sponsored. And I ended up, this is a long story in itself, working for an engineering business. I actually pretended to be a control systems engineer with an electrical engineering degree for about 8 months, and somehow got through that, and then ended up managing that company. And then that went through like the worst mining recession in Australia's history. So that was just like, it was all about growth. It was all about learning new things. It was like jump in at the deep end and swim as hard as you can. But ultimately it started to wear on me, and I realized that I don't love mining and the mining industry. I didn't love the people I was serving. I wasn't passionate about my role. I was stuck to an office 5 days a week, and that started to take a big toll. And I started to unknowingly started to become misaligned with who I truly was. So I liken it to, I was swimming in the sea and I was just with my head down and I was thrashing about. And then after a while, I put my head up and was like, where the hell am I? How did I get to this point? And that had kind of manifested itself in terms of my health was poorer. I was more angry. I drank more. I was getting out of bed later, less energy. And then I was like, right, enough's enough. And I realized the cost of it. So then I just jumped all in, and I think I spent about $20,000 over the next 18 months to figure out who I was, what I wanted to do, the life I wanted to lead. I was like, if I'm going to do a job, what my next chapter, I need to know what this looks like, not just jump into the next thing and make the same mistakes again. So that journey, that growth journey of all this uncovering who I was and what inspired me, that then ironically made me realize that what I really wanted to do was help other people go through that, because I'd started to become somebody I wasn't, and I'd forgotten all of this, childish, energetic Jim. I'd forgotten all that, and I realized that was my greatest gift, not my greatest, not something that was to be muted. And I want to help people do that. Nice,
that's really nice. And I think what's so nice is your story behind that. That's I didn't obviously know quite a bit what you just shared as well. I think it's very brave of you to share that, by the way. So thank you for doing that. And obviously you can see how this ties in here what we're talking about today. So could you just give us a little bit of a brief summary of what's here? What I'll do is we'll remove that slide in a moment so we can just focus in a little bit more on what you've got to say. But just tell us a little bit more about what you plan to talk about today, Jim. It'd be lovely.
Yeah, well, as you can see, the word alignment crops up on a lot of those slides, and there's so many examples in life, in engineering, when something is misaligned. Like, let's say you take a car and you misalign one of the wheels and you still try and drive it forward. There's so many repercussions that happen there. Obviously, it wears the part out, it wears other parts out, it makes more noise, it's damaging, it costs, it slows you down, it's less fuel efficient. And so many of us are living our lives out of alignment with who we truly are, right. i.e., what is our natural flow, what energizes us, who are we inspired to serve. And what ties in with that is we sort of motivate ourselves to do stuff. We motivate ourselves to earn enough money to pay the bills. We motivate ourselves to get out of bed because we don't want to be fired. We motivate ourselves to do this, to go to the gym. And motivation is exhausting. It's exhausting because it requires energy. And if you're having to motivate yourself every day, then you're not living in alignment with your true self. You're not living in alignment with your why, your mission. You're not serving your ideal customer in the way that you want to serve them. And that's where inspiration comes in. Right. It's something that pulls you along. You're not having to push. So I experienced that, and I've seen the other side of it, and I feel the other side of it, and I feel it every single day. And I see other people like big red flags above them when I hear them speak or watch their body language, or when I know who they truly are and I see that there's a misalignment there. It really bothers me. And I just like, it's not a cost shifting to what you truly love. Yeah. Is a must in your life. Life is too damn short not to. Like, what are you doing? You don't have to live a life according to somebody else's blueprint, somebody else's rules, and somebody else's template just because of fear or unknown. There's way more to it than that. And when you tap into that, it's like jumping into a river and just going with the current rather than trying to swim upstream.
Right. I mean, it's so much more tiring to swim up the stream against the tide, isn't it? In fact, ultimately, it can be the very thing that kills you or drowns you, as it were. So,
and as you mentioned with COVID, there's been a lot of uphill swimming recently, and the current has gotten stronger, and that's where people have realised, oh, maybe this wasn't the right path, or they haven't, and they're just thrashing around even harder. Yeah,
well, thank you, Jim. We'll come back to that in a second. But I just realised, actually, I inadvertently, and I apologise, I missed you out a bit earlier on, and yet you're a very important person within Business Growth Bureau. So, Mira, just give a very quick introduction to yourself, what you're really passionate about as well.
Yes, okay, thank you. I think most people know us and know me and what I do. Been working for Rupert for many, many years. My title is actually Client Relations Director. But it doesn't tell the whole story. Yes, I work very closely with our clients. I train them, I give them the support they need, and that gives me a great boost. I love working with people and helping them in whatever they need help with. Also support Rupert on everything else. You know, he's very stretched, so whatever he needs me to do, I do. I'm a housewife, mother, house owner, very busy person.
Yeah, Mira, you're playing it very safe today. We won't share with what you shared with us before we went on air today, but that's a very good introduction.
So the bit about the bikini.
Yes.
Yeah, we won't share that.
No, we won't.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So Mira, if it's right, I'll leave you backstage to answer the chat, etc. But Jim will go through these points here, which I'd love to do. So just bear me a second. So we just bring everything back and I figure how to do all this good stuff. There we go.
It's a good job you've got nothing embarrassing on your other screen behind, by the way, because you've got that mirror there. That would be brilliant if you had a tab that you didn't want people to see.
Well, yes. I would normally have a green screen here, actually, but it seems to make this computer, the processor, difficult to keep up with, even though it's actually got a high-spec machine. So unfortunately, I have to put up with the mirrors. So hence, when you saw a cat walking, you probably saw two of them rather than one. So I forgot to close the window, but there you go. But Jim, really just know a lot more. I know that you talk about a lot about alignment and your why. So was the point you really discovered your why when you were basically transitioning out of your time in Australia into Next? Was that the big transformational moment for you when you realised, for what you're saying, you just had to do something different? Was it at that particular point in time?
It was that particular point in time, yeah. There was no one moment. There was lots of moments in a 6-month, year, 18-month period where I had a bit of a light bulb and an epiphany and I learned something. But it would be great to sit here and go, there was one moment where everything just clicked. But that wasn't the case, and that's often the case in life. It's a series of small moments that come together, and then we realized. But yeah, it was when I started to open my eyes. I started to surround myself with people who were living a life that I felt like I wanted, and started to uncover, like, okay, who am I? And all of the things that I've been judging myself for being crap at, they're actually my greatest gifts. I just need to flip it round on its head. Yeah. So you know, going to that seminar with Roger Hamilton, doing that test, that was one moment. Learning about, or going to see Tony Robbins, another moment when I flew to Florida to do that. I went to another event in Montreal. And there was a series of these moments where I was like, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, I know that's really good. It's interesting what you were saying about different points. They don't always come to you straight away, because I was watching a TED talk. Funny enough, it was Bill Gates was on the TED talk. It was to do about COVID, ironically enough. It's quite a long talk. But the point he was making there is that actually quite often a lot of the insights don't just come in one go. They come over a period of time. And that actually then leads to almost like the transformational change. So I think it's obviously there was presumably one big trigger from what you described earlier on, which was almost like a light switch then made you think, well, actually I need to reevaluate what I'm doing. But it's presumably how things have evolved since that's maybe why you are what you are today, isn't it? So that's a really interesting part. What I love about what you do as well is the way you've been able to take what you're really passionate about and turn that into a real business. And also you seem to be having a really big impact on other people. What would you say have been some of the biggest impacts you've had with whom? I appreciate you may not want to mention names, but what have been some of those big impacts, biggest impacts, and what has been the triggers for those, and how have you helped them out of them, or what's been the learnings from that?
Yeah, good question. So I'll share a recent example. I won't name names, but one of my prouder success stories is working with a girl, a woman, and when we started, she was so out of alignment with herself. She'd lost so much confidence. She didn't really want to hang out with people. She thought she was an introvert because she didn't enjoy the people she was spending time with, and she was really suffering at work. She'd been off work for 8 months, and not that long, and she'd been kind of given a sort of demotion to let it get through that kind of process. And by the way, this isn't a typical situation with a lot of my clients, but this is like an extreme case. And we just started working together and started uncovering. We started working one-on-one. Then she came to the event, which was one of the thumbnails you showed. And she's now in one of my groups. And the process, it wasn't so much of it was just a journey of understanding who she truly was, reframing some of the things that happened to her. Now, there was one critical piece in her story that had been the catalyst for her downward spiral. And it comes down to something that I talk about with my clients so often. It's about meaning. So something had happened to her, an experience had happened to her, and that had triggered off loads of emotional sort of cues, lots of emotional triggers had been fired off in that moment. And she'd associated a meaning with that experience and created a story around it. And she'd let that story completely, undermine her confidence, undermine her work and everything else. So what we did was revisited that story, and I got her to sit away from herself. Like, okay, this is you with a story of, of what happened. How about you sit, I do this sort of courtroom scene where you say, right, now play the opposing lawyer and argue the case for the opposed. Here's the theory. Now you've got to argue why that theory is absolute nonsense and this story is true. Now do that. So then you can kind of remove yourself from that experience and you're looking at it from an objective point of view. And she realized that the way she'd interpreted that story never actually happened. It was actually a really positive, it was a really positive experience. It was something at work. She'd stood up on a leadership thing and she felt like she'd been abandoned. She'd pissed everyone off. She'd let people down, and that had gone downhill from there. But actually, she was rewarded for that. She was congratulated. She'd stood up when no one else did, and she'd been told all these things, but they just didn't go in because she'd made a story up in an instant that it was a horrendous experience.
No, that's bizarre. And
so
what was the trigger then that helped it? Well, obviously that courtroom scene type scenario, was that the big trigger that helped her to just see things completely differently?
That was the big trigger, yes. But like we said before, it's a series of other things that helps rewrite the story. And then we've got to say, okay, well, what's the new story? What's the real story? What makes you, confident? What makes you aligned? What makes you energetic? Where did you really add the value?
Right.
Those things had always been there. She just hadn't allowed herself to see them because she had a story that opposed that viewpoint. And we don't like that. When we have a story, we don't like alternative theories. So we just started to rewrite that story. And then when she came to the event, she shared something that actually, I've always wanted to host my own event. for this particular topic with these particular audiences in this particular location. And she was absolutely dead scared of the idea of it, just even starting with it. So on the event, we pushed her to like lean into it. And then, cut a long story short, 2 weeks ago, she had her first event, and it was a rip-roaring success. She had, I think, 8 attendees, and the feedback she got was amazing. And that was all in the state of what, 8 months.
Nice.
And so that's just such an example of how she didn't learn anything new, so to speak, about herself. She didn't gain any new skills. She just uncovered what was in her. She allowed herself to tap into that flow, to that genius and that energy, and then
that was there. Yeah. Oh wow. So no, that's I love that story. And you refer a lot about the difference between motivation and inspiration. Yeah, I'd love to understand a bit more about that. Is one very much as a result of the other, or is it a bit like the chicken and egg, as it were? Which way round does it happen?
That's a good question, and I suppose you can, sometimes you don't have any of either, and you motivate yourself to the point where you have inspiration. But I had never really kind of considered it like that before. What the difference, I think, is one is pull, one's push, and the easiest way of saying it is, because people talk about motivation, and I think motivation is well overrated. People talk about motivating themselves to do something. Yeah, I'm really motivated to do this, but motivation for me takes energy. It takes willpower, it takes calories to motivate yourself to do something. And if you are motivating yourself to do something, then by definition, you have to kind of jump over a hurdle. And why is that hurdle there in the first place? Maybe it's not aligned. And that's fine every now and again. And we've got to motivate ourselves to do stuff that we don't necessarily love. But if our life is 80% or 90% about motivation and there's no inspiration, then it's exhausting. And that's why they say, psychologists all over the world will say, or productivity specialists will say, do the hard stuff first. Get your exercise out the way early. Get all the stuff that you don't want to do, get that out of the way early, because then you have the most energy then. Nice. And slowly through the day, you deplete your energy source as you motivate yourself, as you require willpower to do stuff you're not necessarily inspired to do. So by the end of it, you've got none in the tank. That's why you make poor decisions later at night, like chocolate bars or going to sleep late or whatever. Yeah. So there's a net loss of energy. Inspiration, however, that's being pulled. That's a net gain in energy. When you're inspired to do something, you don't need to push through any kind of hurdle. It pulls you along. And then by the end of it, you've got more energy than you did at the beginning. So I'm inspired to come on this call. I didn't need to motivate myself to get on this with you and to say yes, and then, do this, that, and the other. I just love doing this stuff. I love talking to people about you.
I guess I probably bullied you into it, actually, but
no bullying necessary, not one bit. And as a result, I'm going to have more energy at the end of this than I did at the beginning.
Yeah, nice.
So if we can design our business and our life around things that inspire us, rather than having to motivate ourselves to do things every day, then we're going to have more energy. When we've got more energy, we get more confidence. When we've got more confidence, more creative, we get more success, more happiness, more everything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And with inspiration, is inspiration very closely aligned with why, or is it actually more or less the same thing?
I think absolutely. I think I liken the two. So your why is something that inspires you. It's something that focuses you during the times of distraction. So when people are trying to pull you from pillar to post, if you're inspired by something and you've got clarity on it, you can just kind of walk straight through the middle of all that, and it doesn't distract you. And also, it's going to drag your ass through the tough times, because it's all very well saying be inspired, do something you love, but that doesn't mean there's not tough times. There's going to be crap days. Yeah. But when you're inspired by something and you have clarity over what that inspiration is, then you don't need to fight through that all the time. It doesn't feel like work. And I've never felt like genuinely speaking, I've never felt like I needed to turn back. I've never thought that it was too much. I've never wondered what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
Ever, since I started the business.
This is presumably as well because you act out a lot of this, first of all, every day in your personal lives, but also when you're working with clients, you're taking them out of their normal day-to-day environments. And you're actually cutting through all those layers, aren't you? Because presumably when people first arrive and they meet for the first time, once you've gone through the first day or so, you start to cut through all that, and you actually start to see the real people and the real energy behind it all, and what aspires. So that must be really, really satisfying in terms of some of the experiences you've enjoyed with them and the other way around.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Those events. So the last one we did was January in Gran Canaria, and that was just like, I'm buzzing for, you know, the 5 days or however long the event is, and I'm just like wired. I can barely go to sleep, and then after, you know, obviously I crash at some point because it's exhausting eventually, like 2 days after the event. But during that, there's so much inspiration, so much energy and flow, and like the connection and everything. It's phenomenal.
Very nice. And you also talk a lot about the cost of living out of alignments with your true self. I mean, can you give some examples of where perhaps things have gone horribly wrong because people have, without again mentioning names, but where they perhaps have got things allowed to fall out of alignment? What's some of the worst scenarios you've possibly experienced? And then through working with those people, how have you helped to put things back together again?
Yeah, so I mean, every one of my clients to some degree is living out of alignment with them, with their true self, whether it's their work or their partners or whatever. So it shows up in lots of ways. And there was one particular example where I was working with she was a lawyer, and we kind of did some, you know, I actually did the time dynamics test, did some profile work, uncovered who she truly was, and then she actually resisted these revelations. She didn't believe them. She's like, no, I am a lawyer. I am a serious lawyer, and I'm not a creator. I'm not a creative, because creatives are starving. Creatives are starving artists, and they're not serious. They're not sensible. I'm a corporate lawyer, and I've paid a lot of money to get to this point. Understandable, and that happens a lot, especially in white collar, the old school white collar industries like law, engineering, medical, that kind of thing. There's so often there's so many people out of alignment. They're doing it because their parents did it, or because, I don't know, it was a path that was well worn. So, but for her, when she finally realized that actually she is a creator, she is this kind of profile, she felt that every day was a struggle, was a battle, but that was just part of being a lawyer, and she was busy, and she felt like everyone was trying to, I think the quote was, everyone was trying to sort of eat her soul. Whenever they came to her for advice, they thought she thought they were trying to take from her, rather than actually they come to you because you know what you're doing. But by the way, have you ever realized that maybe there's a misalignment here? And how about showing me where you are creative in your life? And then there's all of these examples in her life of where she makes things and draws things and thinks things. And that was impacting her health. It was impacting her relationships. It was impacting her stress levels, all this kind of medication, relationship struggles, all this kind of stuff. And the same with me, but to a lesser extent, it manifests itself. It permeates through all these areas of our life. And so often we just don't realize it.
Yeah. And so what actually helped to turn that situation around? What was the key learnings that she got from what's happened with working with you? And, you know, how do you help her to bring that back into alignment with her true self?
For her, the big one was understanding, and it's the same for a lot of people, but it was understanding where that identity that she had came from. Right. She had an identity of herself as a corporate lawyer, as a serious, worked for a Fortune 500 company. I'm serious, I'm this, I'm that, and the other. But that wasn't her story. That was her parents' story.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Her parents were so scared. She was energetic and wild as a kid. So what they did, they were scared by that. So they tried to rein her in, and then they tried to push her down this path that felt more secure for them. So she'd all of a sudden, because when we're kids, we don't know who we are. We're looking for cues from our parents and teachers, and we're just absorbing it. So we hear these stories of, oh, Jim talks a lot. Oh, Rupert's good at maths. Oh, Muriel's good at X. And then right, okay, maybe I am that. We only have to hear it a few times. It becomes our identity. Yeah. And then we go through life with all these sticky notes on that we didn't even put on there. And then we talk about it like it was us. And she had done that to an extreme amount. And it was just a case of identifying that. And then it comes back to story, start to rewrite that story, rewrite that identity of who she truly was, and empowering her to live into that.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think Renata's made a really good point there about living in alignment with your true self, and I 100% understand and relate to that. What would you say is also? I mean, obviously, I suppose you've given some warning signs of what can go wrong when things do actually fall out of alignment with your true path. I suppose one of the things I thought is it related to this as well is there's a lot of talk as well, generally about what I class as self-sabotage as well. Do you think we all have a tendency to do this to a degree? And what are sort of good coping mechanisms to deal with self-sabotage? Because in reality, what you're talking about, there's presumably a large element of self-sabotage with everything she was doing.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the thing that unites all my clients, as well as this insatiable appetite for growth, the challenge that so many of them and us, you, me, to some extent or another, it comes down to self-worth.
Yeah.
So we have a certain level of self-worth. Let's say it's a y-axis, okay? And as a kid, we're trying to figure out where we fit in the world. And if we hear that we're stupid, or we're fat, or we're non-athletic, or we don't deserve this, that, and the other for so long when we're a kid, and we can't do anything to rectify that, then all of a sudden our level of self-worth is down here, because that's just what we believe. We begin to believe that's all we're worthy of.
Right.
And what happens where self-sabotage kicks in, it's like a thermostat. You set the thermostat to 30, the heat will go on until it gets to 30 degrees, and then it will shut off again. Then it'll drop down, then it'll go up to 30 degrees, and then self-sabotage is just thermostat. So if you've got low self-worth, it's like having a thermostat set to 8 degrees. The heating's only going to come on. The success is the motivation, inspiration is only going to push you up to that 8, because we can't feel like we're receiving more or giving more than what we feel like we are worth, because then there's a misalignment. There's no equilibrium, and we can't deal with that. It needs to be in alignment.
It can almost be self-actualizing, or becomes a spiral as well, isn't it? Because I think people can, including myself, I will have to reason that, so I'm no exception to this, is in a sense, you can almost be like you're staring at a brick wall, or you're like a rabbit in front of the headlights of a car. And it can itself become so debilitating or paralyzing. It's a case of knowing how to allow not the self-sabotage, that part of the brain that's talking to you, not to give it the chance to take control, I guess.
Absolutely. For me, it comes down to awareness and saying, right, well, what are the patterns that are coming up here? I'm getting to a certain level of success and happiness, and then I reach what I perceive to be worthy of, and I can't ever get more than that because then I'm out of alignment. So then we self-sabotage. Yeah. If we are in a relationship, and if we don't feel like, have you ever heard anybody, but often you hear women say, I just attract, the arseholes, excuse my French. I attract the people who make me feel like crap. That's their self-worth. It's their sense of self-worth. They don't feel like they deserve any more than that. So if they did get more than that, there's a high chance they would self-sabotage that relationship, right? Because they don't feel worthy of it. And it's the same with happiness, same with success. So just look at what that blueprint is, look at what that level is, and just rather than trying to cope with it, just change the story, increase your level of self-worth, put that thermostat up higher.
Yeah, I love that analogy with the thermostat. I think that's really, really powerful. And I think it's also about really bringing other people, really good people around you. For example, I'm very fortunate, with running business growth here. First of all, we've got some lovely clients, but also we've got lovely people who love working with us and the other way around. So I'm actually, very blessed in that sense. But I think this element of self-sabotage quite often actually goes back right to our childhood, doesn't it? And in fact, the worst thing is you actually don't realize there are certain repeating patterns of behavior which you can keep on replaying. And I think this is also an example of where there's a great opportunity for people like yourself, or what we're doing, or others on this call, for example, of actually being there to support other people. Because that's my way of thinking. People should all have a coach or a mentor or an advisory board or a team around them, because that's the check and balance that we all need to be in place to make sure that we do stay on a clear path. Because otherwise that repeating pattern behavior has a real risk of resurfacing again, doesn't it? So I love that analogy, so thank you for that. Are there some other sort of warning signs that you can sort of identify around that? Are there, also you shared quite a bit of personal account a bit earlier on what happened years ago to you, but how can people perhaps help to spot that, to identify that, so moving forwards? And any other tips around that would you suggest?
Well, firstly, you've got to be honest with yourself. So I do with my clients what's called actually it's on my website. It's called an alignment test. Really, really basic. And all it is some questions out of 10, like how energized you currently feel about your role. where or how much are you aligned with the vision and the mission of your company, or if you're an employee or not. Your environment, is it aligned with who you truly are? And if you take that test, you don't have to even do the test, just ask yourself those questions, but be really honest, because we come up with all these stories about, yeah, no, I'm having a great time, yeah, everything's going really well, because we don't allow ourselves to admit that things aren't going as well as we like, because we just don't accept that. That's why in investing, people hold on to their losers for way too long, because by selling them, they'd admitted they made the mistake in the first place. By changing paths in our life, we're in danger of saying, what we think we're in danger of is that we admit that we're on the wrong path in the first place. So just get mega honest with yourself. Just ask, like, am I really loving this? And this is where, to your point, the power of your environment comes in. If you're surrounded by other people who are not enjoying themselves and who are out of alignment, they're a terrible reference point, because you may be the happiest in that group of people. When you go to the pub, and we've all heard this, it's who's having the worst time competition. Yeah, my company's terrible because they blah, 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 blah. If you're surrounded by them, then you could be the happiest in that group. It doesn't mean you're going to be as happy as you could be. No. So level up your audience, surround yourself with people who are inspired, who do love what they're doing, and then go, oh wow, I really can't say I feel like that.
Yeah. And I think it's about always continually seeking new challenges and new opportunities, and looking to self-improve all the time, isn't it? So, because you need to do that, because otherwise you're just standing still, or in real terms going backwards, because everyone else is moving ahead without you as well. I think, so bring up Daniel's comment. This Spread Engineering, by the way, is Daniel. I'll have to try to persuade him to change that name. I love the name Spread Engineering, by the way, but it's not very good on the feed. Yes, Daniel's raised a really good point. I don't know if you've got anything you would like to add to what he's saying there at all on that point. Like, can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, I agree about limiting beliefs. That's why you need people around you. Oh, I lost it.
Sorry, I was going to bring it back up again.
That's all right. That's why I need people around you. The absence of this is really a symptom of modern disconnected lives and communities. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been living nomadically for 3 years, and it would have been very easy to kind of cut off from people at that point. But I was in this journey, and I realized connection is so important to me. And I think it should be so important to everybody, or it is important to everybody. It's just a case of realizing that. And one of the big things for me was being surrounded by people, comes back to environment again, surrounded by people who you can share these stories with, you can share these challenges with. They don't always have to be entrepreneurial, but they don't always have to be a high performer. They don't always have to be this, that, and the other. But as long as there's overlap there in some degree, and you can go deep with them, that's the important thing. And if you only have a couple of people in your life who you can do that with, then that's going to be really powerful, versus having 1,000 Facebook friends, none of whom mean anything to you. So yes, Daniel, I completely agree. No,
exactly. Thank you. You also talk about gaining clarity in terms of what inspires you and where your true path may lie. What are some good techniques what would you suggest around that, and what are some good techniques to try and get that sense of clarity?
So I would start being honest about who you truly are, and if you can be attuned to your emotions, that's a really big one, because I wasn't for a long time. I didn't realize how stressed I was until afterwards. Thankfully, I caught it before I got in any deeper, but some people have been in it for a while and they haven't realized it. So just being tuned into what your emotions are telling you. Are you stressed? Are you wound up? Can you feel your state changing? If you can become tapped into noticing your state change, and our state changes on a moment by moment basis, shoulders hunched, neck down, versus the power pose versus fast heart rate, slow heart rate. So just if you can get tuned into that, and then you learn what triggers those moments and how often you're in them, then you can start to go, shit, you know what? I feel really wound up every Sunday night. Why is that? Oh, it's because I'm going to work tomorrow and I really don't love it. Or I feel really wound up every time my wife or husband says this or does that. Oh, okay, interesting. Where is that coming from? And just having that conversation with yourself and being open to learning what your triggers are. And then also, that test, the Talent Dynamics test, I recommend. That's an awesome one for sort of highlighting what gifts you have and where you're in flow. But I suppose one exercise which I'll skim over it because it could be too long. But one exercise I give all of my clients is and I talk about flow a lot. Flow states are these moments when you're loving what you're doing. Like, I'm in my flow right now. I just looked at the clock before and realized how long we've been chatting, and it's gone like that. It's energizing. You're enjoying it. You've got more. You're more happy, and you have more energy at the end of it than the beginning. Flow states are really important for our lives, and a lot of us don't tap into our flow states often enough, or even realize what creates them. So if you can identify when you're in a state of flow, or have been in the past, when you're a kid, an adult, work, play, sports, by yourself, with other people, find those moments when you were just like in the zone, when time flew by, when you were really energized, you were successful at what you did, you made a difference. And then dig into what those moments look like. Who were you with? And if people are watching this back again, I'll rush over them, but they can, rewind. So what were you doing? What was your role? Were you the CEO? Were you the facilitator? Were you this, that, and the other? What was your team player? What was your position? Were you the boss? What was the task you were performing, more importantly? So were you playing golf? Were you brainstorming? Were you coaching? Who were you with? Were you by yourself? Were you with a team? Were they people you knew, people you didn't know? What was your environment? Were you indoors, outdoors, in work, at home? And then what was the impact? So did you make somebody cry? Did you make somebody laugh? Did you solve a problem? Did you create harmony? So if you can dive into those flow states, find the flow states, come up with like 5 examples, dive into them, break them down into the component parts. Then you can start to build a picture of the things that energize you. And when you can do that, then you can start to design your life and business around those energizing things. Nice.
That's really nice. In fact, Karen's made a really good point. One of the most powerful phrases I've found is, it's okay to be me. And this has really helped people feel more comfortable with themselves, and then find people, environments who are aligned with you.
Very true.
Yeah, I absolutely love
Karen.
Yes, thank you very much, Karen, for that. Yes, Karen is a very astute lady, by the way. So if anyone knows, so I've got to say that because you'll thumb me next time I see it.
But no, Karen's right, and I think the big thing is find an environment that celebrates you, rather than finding an environment that forces you to mute your personality, because that's what I did. And I started to convince myself that I was just unfit for the role that I was in, rather than, no, actually my environment is just incorrect. So just find that environment before you change yourself every day of the week.
Yeah, no, lovely. I think interesting. Thanks so much for that, Renato, by the way. It's 100% agree with that too. I think the other thing as well is, if you're in flow and there is a lot of general shit going on, as a way, if I excuse that language, if you are in flow, in a sense, often that will actually really help you to put those other problems or challenges in little boxes. I always give this analogy: if something's overwhelming you and becomes a real problem, deal with what you have to deal with there and then, at a time that's suitable. Then put it in a box, put the lid on it, and just move it to one side. And then agree with yourself, you're not going to look at it till the following day or the following week. Yeah. And I think it's really, to me, I found that's really helpful as well, because we could all go overwhelmed by different things, and to deal with challenges like that as well. To me, it's a bit of a coping strategy, but certainly I've found immensely helpful.
But just touching on that, I would go one step further and say, having those things crop up every now and again is awesome. If your life feels like that every day of the week, if you're having to cope with too much stuff, if you're having to put too much stuff in boxes, if too much stuff feels like a should versus a want, then it's not about dealing with coping strategies. It's about dealing with, okay, well, what the hell are these in your life for? How can you design a life and business or whatever so they're not there? Because coming up with overcoming them every now and again is powerful. But if you're having to overcome them too often, then maybe they shouldn't be there in the first place.
That's a very fair point, actually. And I love that. There's sort of time for one more sort of quick question, if that's okay, which I'd love to ask you.
Cool.
Is this is really what you've described as establishing who you're inspired to serve. So it's interesting, what type of people are you inspired to serve? As a case in point, where do you feel you like to make the biggest difference?
I want to coach people who want to be coached, first and foremost. So I have a high need for growth. I love helping people. I love connecting. So I work best and I get on best with people who want to connect and who are prepared to connect with themselves and who are prepared to deal with what they find. Okay. What is it? Something like courage is not the absence of fear. It's being able to see it and then move past it or conquer it or overcome it or whatever. And I'm inspired to serve people to serve people who are they want to achieve more, but not just for the sake of achievement. They want to be more. They want to make more of a difference, and they're prepared to go through that process. They're prepared to go through the uncertainties, and they're inspired to do so.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. Again, it goes back to everything we sort of talked about this afternoon, which is, you know, fundamentally good. So I love this story. There's an element that we've sort of featured on our website. It's not what we talked about particularly, but there's a lovely TED talk. It's a very simple one, which is very humorous. That I think I mentioned a live stream before a couple of months ago. That it was this guy that actually set out to get basically 100 days of rejection, and decided to record himself being rejected, and then was going to post it up on YouTube. But it started off, and he was trying to think of really outrageous things to do. So he'd ask, he went into a building and asked the security guard where he could borrow $1. And the security guard told him basically to go away in Blythe's language. And of course he got on camera, and he thought, that was a bit not very pleasant to deal with, but okay, next one. So he went into somewhere else and asked another outrageous question. And again, the following day he was told to go away in so many words and so on. So he then got to, I think, the 5th day of this, and he went into the equivalent of Dunkin' Donuts and said, can you make me 5 Dunkin' Donuts where the donuts all overlap each other like the Olympic rings? And the person sort of scratched his head and then thought about it for a minute and said, yeah, I can do that for you. And he found he kept on doing it. And some days he kept on getting more and more rejection. But over time, first of all, it didn't actually start to matter to him anymore. But it also, the other thing is he suddenly found that a lot more people started saying yes as well, which instilled further confidence. It's a very humorous video. If you were to go to the TV video section on our website, look for TED Talks. There's one which everyone's got to see. You know, obviously, he's a master of everything to do with. It's all about the why, as it were. But that talk as well, for me, I think it's great. So
I'm sure there's something in that about going into those situations, not caring whether you're going to be rejected or not, and that you know, I'm not a big one on kind of understanding energies and synchronicities and all that kind of stuff, but I'm sure there's something there where if you go into those situations and you really are unattached to the outcome and you have confidence, then that people are going to feel that. It's definitely the case in business, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, Jim, thank you very much. So we'll probably have a quick wrap-up section at the end. And by the way, when it finishes today, just don't send this to, we will have a bit more of a chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Karen's just asked a quick question. Thank you for sneaking that in, Karen. So any thoughts on how to cope with conflict between what you feel you ought to do, i.e. spending time with an elderly relative that you love, and what you need to do for yourself, your sanity, your personal fulfillment, etc.? That's quite a difficult question, actually. But any initial thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think firstly, there's self-judgment in there, and there's guilt, and where there is judgment, there is zero growth. So, Karen, firstly, stop judging yourself so harshly. Not many people would love to spend time with an elderly relative instead of going to do what they love. So just be at peace with the fact that you would rather be doing something else some of the time, because that judgment and guilt is gonna sap a lot of energy, and it's gonna serve you in no way whatsoever. So that would be the first thing I'd say, and then say, well, and we've all heard this quote a million times recently, is, you know, whose oxygen mask are you supposed to put on first in the airplane? You put your own on. When you are in flow, when you are loving what you're doing, when you're putting yourself first, but not from a selfish point of view, then you're actually going to be able to add more value. You're going to have more energy, you're going to have more confidence, more happiness, and then spending time with this elderly relative is going to seem like an absolute doddle. If your life is full of motivating yourself to do things, of things that feel like shoulds rather than wants, then everything on top of that feels like way too much like hard work. So take that time for yourself, find what puts you into a state of flow, find what energizes you, do that first, then you'll find that doing the other stuff, doing the shoulds, is way easier.
Lovely.
But it's a tough question to answer, so you know that's not a black and white one. But I
think that's a brilliant response. Well, obviously Karen thinks it's brilliant as well. So, thank you for that, Karen. It's a lovely question, actually. So thank you.